A few days ago, archaeologists announced the discovery of what may have been a solstice gathering site near Stonehenge, where people feasted and celebrated the longest day of the year nearly 5,000 years ago. It's easy to understand why. The summer solstice marks the triumph of light. The sun stands at its highest point. Life is abundant. But Judaism tells a different story. Our calendar follows the moon, yet it remains tied to the sun. Passover must occur in the spring, so we have to adjust the calendar. The rabbis even associated the 365 negative commandments with the 365 days of the solar year, so there is a connection. And when Adam first witnessed the shortening days, he feared that the world itself was coming to an end. Judaism never ignored the heavens or the solar year. It simply interpreted them differently. Just as the sun reaches its greatest strength, the Jewish calendar enters the month of Tammuz, the season that leads to the breach of Jerusalem's walls and the destruction of the temple. And yet, according to the rabbis, on the very day the temple was destroyed, the Messiah was born. This week, I want to explore a uniquely Jewish insight. While other cultures celebrated the victory of light, Judaism discovered hope in darkness and redemption in the shadows of catastrophe. Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on your favorite podcast platform, and now on YouTube and Substack. We also publish a source sheet on Sefaria, and a link is included in the show notes. This week we read Parshat Chukat Balak, a summer parsha. We also are in the month of Tammuz and have just crossed the summer solstice. We are about to begin the 3 weeks of mourning, and the situation in Israel is once again uncertain. Welcome to a midsummer nightmare. So, Rabbi, it is interesting times that we live in, but I am sure that those who are very troubled by the current edition of the Iran deal will be talking about the 3 weeks and the bad news that occurs to the Jews during this period. Clearly, while other people are celebrating a midsummer's night dream, we Jews in the middle of the summer are agonizing about our history and our future.
I mean, that's for sure true. I mean, obviously, the fact that the temples were destroyed on the 9th day of Av, that fell during the summer, the rabbis don't make a point of the fact that it is in the summer. But we all know, and it has a lot to do with summer camp and kids, that the summer is associated with Tisha B'Av. And the summer is associated with destruction and Messiah and all those kinds of things. So it's interesting the way that kind of evolved over time, even though in the earliest sources, that wasn't really such a big deal.
So we're used to looking at the December dilemma, where we compare maybe how we Jews celebrate the middle of the winter, the depths of darkness. But I don't think we look enough at the summer solstice and how our culture celebrates, commemorates, lives through it, as opposed to what Shakespeare was clearly talking about. A Midsummer's Night Dream is about a party. It makes sense. As I said in the intro, the sun is shining. We're in the middle of the summer. You would think it would be a time to celebrate. But near Stonehenge, they seem to have now found, it was in the Times that I picked it up, they found 48 pits that are carbon dated 5,000 years ago. And based on what they found there, broken shards of dishes and jugs and food and bones that must have been eating, the idea is there was a celebration there as well. And if you've ever seen pictures of the sun peeking out through Stonehenge, it's on that longest day of the year, and boom, it's set up so that you see it. You can really see how it's epic, and it is the pinnacle of something, and something to celebrate. I mean, I think you don't need a philosopher to tell you that the way you observe and travel through the calendar obviously affects your mindset. But there are some scholars that I dug up up Jonathan Z. Smith, who really sees religion as an act of deliberate human ingenuity and imagination, and he focused a lot on sacred calendars. And we don't do that maybe enough. But clearly, the cycle of the year is a language in and of itself, and it really impacts the way we think. And there were modern additions to that, like summer camp, as you mentioned.
Now, I think, first of all, you think about it for a minute. So yesterday was the longest day of the year, and there was a big music festival in Paris. Around the world, they have the celebration of the longest day of the year. When you think about it, today was a little shorter than yesterday. Each day is going to be a little shorter until December 21st. Now, that's kind of frightening to think that we're now in a downward trajectory until the coldest, darkest time of the year. I'm here in Paris, and it was 102 degrees today, and it got dark. Shabbos was out at 11:04. So you can't get any later than that. But that's it. It's over. Because now we're starting to get shorter and shorter and shorter. And you're 100% right. It's a little bit depressing to think that December 21st is right around the corner.
So tell me, what were the celebrations like in Paris? How did you feel it? Because in New York, you don't feel it at all.
We had a wedding, so we didn't participate. I'll tell you, the only way we knew, they were worried that there was going to be traffic leaving the city because of these music celebrations. But June 21st is a day of celebration. It's the pinnacle. We've reached the pinnacle, the longest day of the year. And again, in Europe, it's more of a big deal than it is in America, because when it gets dark at 11:04, we finished dinner tonight at 9:30 and we started walking home. It literally looks like 2:00 in the afternoon.
So another scholar, Mircea Eliade, wrote actually a book, Sacred Time and Myths. And again, I'm wondering if how much of your feeling of it's the longest day, which translates in tomorrow is getting a little shorter, is a kind of something that's written into your DNA as a Jew? Or is this how everyone else feels? Or is there an alternative? Eat, drink, and be merry. It's just something to celebrate. Stop with the worry already. I'm just curious, because we're going to look a little bit in our tradition where some of that is baked in. They did see the decline at that moment of the pinnacle.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to know. I know that, Shabbat candle lighting this week. If last week in New York it was 8:14, so this week it's going to be 8:13. Like, it doesn't really make any difference. But that's symbolic in the fact that we're starting to get shorter.
You just said something that triggered a thought in my mind, because our religion, and there are other religions, I think, that operate this way, but certainly ours is so set in the calendar, at least once a week, you need to know when the sun sets. It's kind of like a built-in Stonehenge. We take it with us. And you really feel that because you see the numbers. I'm wondering if that's a part of it. I mean, other religions, the secular calendar is midnight. There's nothing in the universe that signals midnight. It's something that you read on your clock. But we really do live by sunrise and sunset, whether it's our prayers, whether it's the weekly Shabbat. So maybe that enters into it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and the Muslims are like that too. I'll just tell you something interesting, since we want to talk about other religions. The Muslims have Ramadan, and Ramadan is, they fast the daylight for 30 days. Now, Ramadan is interesting because Ramadan shifts to different periods during the year. Each year, it jumps 11 days earlier. So some years, Ramadan is in the middle of the summer, and they fast till 9:00 at night. And sometimes Ramadan is in December and they fast till 4:00 in the afternoon. So they're also very sensitive in terms of Ramadan to, the period, the time of the year.
So again, that would be a study worthwhile, what happens when you have a culture where holidays are not linked to the solar cycle at all, such as the Muslims. If the Christians followed a similar calendar, Christmas could be in August one year. What does that do to your psyche? And that is outside of our realm of expertise or wisdom. Maybe someone's written about that, but with us, that's an amazing segue into the one pasuk that really determined that we did have to adjust. The word is intercalate our calendar. So in Deuteronomy, it says, observe the month of Aviv. Aviv means either spring or when the crop begins to bud, and offer a Passover sacrifice to the eternal your God. For it was in the month of Aviv that God took you out of Egypt. Rashi says this means before it comes, watch whether it will be capable of producing ripe ears. So he takes the Aviv to be a fruit that blossoms, so that one may offer the Omer meal offering during it. And if not, so if you're at a time of year that you think is Aviv, but it's not blossoming yet, if you don't see that yet, then you have to intercalate the year, meaning add a month to the winter period. In Hebrew, it's Aver et Shana. So we Jews kind of learn from this, there might be other places as well, that we have a hybrid between a lunar calendar where every month is mechadesh, it renews, and the solar calendar, which is the seasons of the year. And because of Passover for sure, maybe others as well, we have to adjust our calendar. But the solar year, therefore, becomes important. Now, that is also comes out in the commandments. We all know there are 613 mitzvot, but as they reference them, that Rav Simlai taught in Makot 23b, he says 365 prohibitions corresponding to the days of the number of days in the solar year. So again, many people think that Judaism operates on a lunar calendar. Clearly, the solar calendar entered into their symbolism, entered into their worldview. You can't ignore it.
Right, that's for sure. I mean, that actually, like I mentioned before about Ramadan, that's the difference between Judaism and Islam. Islam is completely lunar. Islam doesn't incorporate the solar year, but Judaism incorporates the solar year. And since the lunar year is 11 days shorter than the solar year, and therefore the lunar year would jump earlier by 11 days, so every 3 years we need a Shnat HaIbur. And, of course, the word Ibur means pregnant. The year is pregnant because it has an extra month, so therefore the year is pregnant. Literally, you can't beat that use of that phrase there.
And we, of course, because we're Madlik, would say it's also pregnant with meaning, right? I mean, that's just the way we think. But the point is that when I talk about the summer solstice, people shouldn't look at me and go, are you kidding? That has nothing to do with Judaism. No, the solar year was important. And now we're going to come across a piece of Talmud that really does, I think, kind of paraphrase what you were saying a second ago when you felt the day after the solstice. You already felt a little bit of dread. You felt a little bit of the days are getting shorter. So this is what it says. With regard to the dates of these festivals, the sages taught, when Adam, that means the original Adam, the first man, saw that the day was progressively diminishing as the days became shorter. Here in the translation, it says the autumnal equinox, but the truth is, he could have seen it on June 23rd. He did not yet know that this is a normal phenomenon, and therefore he said, woe is me, perhaps because I sinned, the world is becoming dark around me, and will ultimately return to the primordial state of tohu and vohu, of chaos and disorder. And this is the death that was sentenced upon me from heaven. He arose and spent 8 days in fasting and in prayer. Once he saw that the season of Tevet, the winter solstice, had arrived, and saw that the day was progressively lengthening after the solstice, he said, clearly the days become shorter and then longer, and this is the order of the world. So again, the rabbis in this piece of Talmud recognize that we are all affected by the shorter days and the longer days, and that it's natural to have those types of feelings that you kind of just very from your kishkas, from your gut, said, this is how we all feel. And so like any great midrash, this translates something that becomes very natural, but I will argue maybe reflects a uniquely Jewish approach to how we view these seasons.
It's such interesting psychology. Because you're right, I say, a piece of me said that today's a little shorter than yesterday, and we're getting close to December. But I'm not worried because I know when we get to December, the days will start getting long again. But Adam in the Garden of Eden, he was nervous because he didn't know how that the cycle would continue. And I think that's really beautiful. The cycle of the year is the cycle of life. And the greatest comfort we have when things are bad is the fact that things are going to get better.
Yes, and that's how we typically feel, I think, certainly as Jews. And I would say that would be the gut response I would have when I repeat and retell this midrash around Hanukkah time. And I say that as we Jews are surrounded by darkness, we light a candle that is Mosef v'holech. If you read the midrash that we just talked about a second ago, you will notice the language kind of resonates that he saw the days getting shorter and shorter, and then ultimately he saw that they were Mosef v'holech. So it kind of ties into that. And now, a word from our sponsor. If there's one thing we value at Matlik Podcast, it's reading texts and talking about them. That's why I'm excited to share something I created called Voice Gift Play. It fits in the palm of your hand like a remote control and clips onto any book. It's inspired by those old school museum audio guides, but this is personal. Voice Gift Play stores up to 10 hours of audio across 999 numbered recordings. You simply enter a number to record a comment, memory, or explanation, and enter the same number to play it back. It's perfect for B'nai Mitzvah practicing their laning, capturing Grandpa's favorite tune, or recording Chad Gad Yar in a voice that matters. Go to voice.gift. That's www.voice.gift and use code MADLIK for 15% off. Thanks. And now back to our podcast. What we're going to explore now is something that I hadn't really given some thought to, and most of us, I don't believe, do either, which is the opposite of that. We all know how we feel in the darkness of the winter and how we light that light, and that gives us hope. What we're going to turn to now is what we feel in the lightness of the summer and how, at least from a Jewish perspective, we seem to find that feeling of dread and uncertainty. So first of all, let's talk about the month that we're in. I believe last week when we recorded Madlik, it was Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. We are in Tammuz now. There's going to be a fast day coming up, Shiva Asar b'Tammuz, the 17th of Tammuz, which marks the beginning of the 3 weeks of mourning. So Tammuz is the 10th month of the civil year, but the 4th month of the Jewish year, starting with Nisan. And just like the modern Assyrian calendar, it is Tammuz is the name, an ancient name in the ancient Near East. It's 29 days. And the name of the month was adopted from the Syrian and Babylonian month Arab Damuzu, named in honor of the Mesopotamian deity Damuzid, Hebrew Tammuz, known to the Sumerians as Damuzid the shepherd. And it's an ancient Mesopotamian and Levantine deity associated with agriculture and shepherds, who is also the first and primary consort of the goddess Inanna, otherwise known as Ishtar. This becomes interesting, and so far I'm quoting from our good buddy Wikipedia. Tammuz is mentioned by name in the book of Ezekiel. We're going to visit that in a second, and probably alluded to in other passages from the Hebrew Bible. In late 19th and early 20th century scholarship of religion, Tammuz was widely seen as a prime example of the archetypal dying and rising god, and that's God with a small g. But the discovery of the full Sumerian text of Inanna's descent in the mid-20th century appeared to disprove the previous scholarly assumption that the narrative ended with Tammuzid's resurrection, and instead revealed that it ended with Tammuzid's death. However, the rescue of Tammuzid from the underworld was later found in the text Return of Tammuzid, translated 63. So, Rabbi, there's a little bit of a controversy about whether this fallen god who dies in the middle of Tammuz actually is resurrected and comes back to life, or it's a real downer and he goes down in the grave. But it is rather interesting that we have a month named after a pagan god, is it not?
Yeah, very interesting. I mean, and obviously that's something that happened later. You say it's mentioned in the book of Ezekiel. That's something that happened after the destruction of the temple, during the time of the temple. And the verse in Zechariah says you referred to the fast of the fourth. So it's Tzom HaRevi'i. The fast of the fourth month is this 17th day of Tammuz. V'Tzom HaChamishi, which is the fast of the fifth month, which is Tisha B'Av during the fifth month. So they describe these days not in terms of Tammuz and Av, but in terms of fourth and fifth month. But that is interesting, right? And that shows, by the way, an evolution, we would say today, Geoffrey, an assimilation of the Jews into the culture. And that they actually took the names of the month, our Jewish months, become the names. And I just was officiated a wedding yesterday, and in the ketubah, we said Tammuz. What a crazy thing to say Tammuz in the ketubah, which is after this this ancient god. Why do we say Tammuz? But that became part of our acculturated tradition that we adopted the names of these months. And if you ask any yeshiva bacher, every yeshiva bacher will tell you that Tammuz must be holy, right? There must be a name directly from God on that side.
I was talking to my brother the other day, and he gave me from the Kabbalah Center the meaning of Tammuz, and trust me, it had nothing to do with an
Tammuz, right?
with an ancient deity. But anyway, this is what Wikipedia quotes: is Ezekiel 8:14, and it says, "Next, God brought me." Means He brought Ezekiel to the entrance of the north gate of the house of God, and there sat the woman bewailing Tammuz. She was mevachot et ha-Tammuz. And I was told, "Have you seen, O mortal? You shall see even more terrible abominations than these." So this is a fascinating pasuk, because on the one hand, number one, it shows that, and this should be no big surprise, that there were Israelites and Jews who were still worshiping foreign gods. In this case, it's Tammuz. But she was crying for Tammuz. Again, if you connect the dots, the Tammuz was someone who was a deity that was mourned at a certain period. I would assume during Tammuz. And then, if that's not interesting enough, then Yechezkel says, and as a punishment, guess what? There are going to be more terrible things that happen than these. He's almost precasting the terrible things that happen during Tammuz. Am I reading too much into this?
No, you're reading it. It's a very interesting verse. Mivakot et ha-Tammuz, right? I mean, that's a funny way to say it, right? You wouldn't say Mivakot et ha-Tammuz. Tammuz doesn't deserve the proper article, the hey at the beginning. But that's obviously the way they refer to it. Anyway, it's a great verse.
And again, it's like so many other things that forecast, because the Jews cried in the desert, many bad things happened on that day. Here, because they worship Tammuz, again, they are going to have some real things to mourn about. Interestingly, in Ezekiel 1, where Ezekiel has the famous Merkavah vision, the vision of the chariot, the real vision of all that is in our mystical tradition. It's in the 13th year on the 5th day of the 4th month. It also happens to be in the month of Tammuz, which again, a kind of lit a light for me that in this Tammuz was bad, was tragedy, was going down to the depths, but also the ability to see the light, to see this vision.
I want to just tell you that the verse says in Zechariah, Tzom HaRevi v'Tzom HaChamishi, V'Tzom HaShvi, and the fast of the 7th month, V'Tzom HaAsiri, and the fast of the 10th month, which is the 10th of Tevet, Yilanu, they will be days of celebration. So even the fast days, which are identified as these months, will be lissason u'simcha. They will be days of celebration. So that's interesting that you quote the verse from the beginning of Ezekiel, because that's the same idea. And that's the same thing as when the days get shorter and the days get longer. And that is that we believe the greatest consolation we have is that even when things are really bad, there's only one way to go, and that is up.
Absolutely. And thank you for adding that verse. Maybe text me the psukim for that, and I'll add it to the Safari show notes. But again, along with what you just said is a tradition that I have the source in the show notes. But I think if you ask people, they will tell you that Tisha B'Av is the day of that we sunk to the depths, but it's also the day when the quote-unquote Messiah will be born. In Eicha Rabbah, it says there's a conversation between a mother whose child is born on Tisha B'Av. It says, because my child has a harsh fate, she says. He said to her, the sage said to her, why? She said to him, because upon his arrival, the temple was destroyed. The sage said to her, we rely on the master of the universe, that upon his arrival it was destroyed, and upon his arrival it will be rebuilt. So again, this concept that you said a second ago, that we Jews can see the glass half full, even as we are looking at the glass half empty or completely empty, in the case of Tisha B'Av. So it is really kind of parallel to what we would think of in terms of Kislev and being in the depth of the winter. But I take away from this, and I can't but think of the current situation that we're in, that in the heights of the summer, when that light is streaming through Stonehenge and we look like we're in the pinnacle, we Jews, based on this kind of narrative and our experience over that same 5,000 years as those people living inside, celebrating in those pits, we've learned to think differently. And the way we think is that we never can afford to be at the pinnacle, and that we always have to find and work at finding the real light and the real potential. And I think that's the real lesson that we took from a Tammuz, which was a deity who perished at the height of the solstice. And we must have learned and internalized a message in there that leads us to look for what's not obvious. With all of the light shed on all of the details, things might look bad or they might look good, but we look for that which is kind of underneath that we need to kind of work on. And we do find the potential. We do have that gnawing feeling within our gut that when things look like they're very good, that we have to be on guard. And I think that's just part of our calendar. But clearly, we are affected by the solstice like any other culture, but I think we do it in a uniquely Jewish way.
I think that's beautiful. What a great way to enter these shorter days. They don't get short by much right now, but it's something to remember as we reach those shorter days. So we want to wish you a happy summer to everybody, and a Shabbat Shalom. This week we read Chukat and Balak. We read a double parsha, getting us ready for the fast of the 17th of Tammuz, and we look forward to seeing everybody next week. Thank you, Geoffrey. Bonsoir to everybody. Good evening, good night, and look forward to next week.
Thank you so much, and we will see you all next week. Shabbat Shalom.